In the heart of the lush, sun-kissed lands of the Oloran Valley, there lay a village called Olowalu. This village was a place of simple joys and ancient traditions, where stories were passed down from generation to generation, each tale woven with the wisdom of the elders. It was here that a young man named Jalen began his journey, a journey that would test his spirit, challenge his resolve, and ultimately shape his destiny. Jalen was a man of 27 years, standing at an average height of 5 feet 8 inches. He was neither the strongest nor the swiftest in the village, but his mind was as sharp as the hunter's spear. He wore a simple African dress made of woven fabrics, its patterns telling the story of his lineage, a family known for their kindness, wisdom, and resilience. Jalen had always been fascinated by the world beyond Olowalu. While others found contentment in farming, fishing, or crafting, he longed for something greater. He was eager to learn, to explore, to understand the mysteries of the world beyond the rolling hills and the dense forests that bordered his village. But the traditions of Olowalu were strong, and the elders often warned against the dangers of seeking what was not meant to be found. One evening, as the golden sun dipped beneath the horizon and the villagers gathered around the communal fire, the elders spoke of an ancient prophecy. It was said that a child born under the third full moon of the harvest season would one day embark on a journey that would change the fate of their people. Some whispered that Jalen, who had been born on such a night, was destined for something far greater than the life of a simple villager. Jalen's restlessness grew with each passing day. He often found himself staring at the distant mountains, wondering what lay beyond. His mother, a kind woman named Adeyemi, sensed his longing. One evening, as they sat outside their hut, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Jalen, my son, you have the heart of a traveler," she said softly. "But remember, the path of the unknown is filled with both wonders and dangers. If you choose to leave, do so with wisdom and purpose." Jalen nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had no wish to bring sorrow to his mother, but he knew that his destiny lay beyond the fields of Olowalu. That night, he made his decision: he would leave at dawn. The next morning, he packed a small bundle of supplies, a gourd of water, a few pieces of dried meat, and a carving knife passed down from his grandfather. As he stepped out of his hut, he was met by his closest friend, Kwame. "You are really going?" Kwame asked, his voice laced with concern. Jalen nodded. "I must, my brother. Something calls to me, and I cannot ignore it." Kwame sighed and handed him a small amulet. "This belonged to my grandfather. He always said it brought protection. May it keep you safe on your journey." Jalen clasped his friend's shoulder in gratitude and, with a final glance at his village, he turned toward the unknown. As Jalen ventured beyond the familiar borders of Olowalu, he felt the weight of solitude. The towering trees of the great forest cast long shadows, and the sounds of hidden creatures whispered from the undergrowth. Yet he pressed on, his heart steady with determination. Days passed, and Jalen faced his first great trial. One evening, as he searched for a place to rest, he stumbled upon a clearing where an old man sat by a fire. The man's hair was white as the clouds, and his eyes held the wisdom of many years. "Come, traveler, warm yourself by the fire," the old man beckoned. Grateful, Jalen sat and shared his food with the stranger. As they ate, the old man spoke. "You seek the unknown, but do you know what it is you truly desire?" Jalen hesitated. "I seek knowledge, adventure, and purpose." The old man nodded. "Then be warned, the path ahead will not be easy. But if you prove yourself worthy, you shall find what you seek." The old man reached into his pouch and handed Jalen a small, intricately carved stone. "This is the stone of seeing. It reveals the truth of those who hold it. Guard it well." With that, the old man disappeared into the night, leaving Jalen to ponder the meaning of his words. Jalen continued his journey, and soon he arrived at a bustling town, the first he had ever seen. The streets were filled with traders, performers, and nobles dressed in garments finer than anything in Olowalu. The scent of spiced meats and fresh bread filled the air, making his stomach growl in hunger. As he wandered, he was approached by a man dressed in silk robes. "You seem new here, traveler. Perhaps I can offer you work?" Jalen hesitated. He had little money, and the idea of earning some was tempting. The man led him to a grand house and promised riches if Jalen agreed to stay and work for him. But something about the man's eyes unsettled him. Remembering the stone of seeing, he held it in his palm, and immediately, the man's image flickered, revealing a cruel, greedy heart beneath his charming words. Realizing the danger, Jalen refused the offer and quickly left the town. He understood now that his journey would be filled with both temptation and deceit, and he had to trust his instincts. As he journeyed further, Jalen encountered a village much like his own. But unlike Olowalu, the people here were suffering from a great drought. Crops had withered, and the river had dried up. Moved by their plight, Jalen sought the village elder and asked how he could help. "There is a well," the elder explained, "but it is guarded by a spirit who allows no one to take its water." Determined to help, Jalen approached the well and saw a shimmering figure hovering above it. "Who dares disturb my waters?" the spirit demanded. Jalen took a deep breath. "I am Jalen, a traveler. The people here suffer. I ask only for water to aid them." The spirit studied him for a long moment. "You ask not for yourself, but for others. That is rare. You may take what you need, but only if you answer this: what is more powerful, the river or the rain?" Jalen thought carefully. "The river flows strong, but it is the rain that gives it life. Without the rain, the river would be nothing." The spirit smiled and stepped aside. "You have wisdom. Take what you need, and go in peace." Jalen returned to the village with water, and the people rejoiced. The elder clasped his hands. "You have a kind heart, traveler. You are destined for greatness." Jalen left the village with renewed purpose. His journey was far from over, but he had learned an important lesson. His path was not just about seeking adventure, but about bringing change where it was needed. As the sun set on the horizon, Jalen knew that his true adventure had only just begun. The air carried the scent of freshly tilled soil, the quiet hum of a place just awakening to its duties. Jalen stood outside his modest hut, deep in thought, his hands clasped behind his back. The burden of wisdom lay heavy on his shoulders, for with knowledge came responsibility. His journey from a humble villager to a man of healing had been long and arduous, but the real challenge lay not in acquiring knowledge, but in convincing his people to accept it. The elders, though wise in their own right, remained skeptical of the new ways he had brought back from the city. Tradition was the lifeblood of the village, and any change was met with resistance. The morning was still young when Jalen heard a frantic knocking at his door. It was Adeyemi, the weaver's daughter, her breath ragged from running. "Jalen, come quickly! My mother, she is burning with fever, and nothing we do helps." Jalen nodded, quickly gathering his medicinal herbs and clay bowls. As they hurried through the village, he noticed the watchful eyes of the elders following him. They had warned him against practicing his methods, but he could not stand idly by while his people suffered. When they arrived at Adeyemi's hut, the air inside was thick with the scent of sickness. Her mother, Mama Fola, lay on a mat, her skin glistening with sweat, her breath shallow. Jalen knelt beside her, feeling her burning forehead. He crushed a mixture of neem leaves and baobab bark, boiling it over a small fire. "She must drink this," he said firmly, but Adeyemi's father, a man of rigid belief, hesitated. "We have called the diviner," he said. "He will speak with the ancestors and drive out the sickness." Jalen did not wish to challenge the village's spiritual customs, but he knew time was against them. "Let her drink this while we wait," he pleaded. "It will ease her suffering." Reluctantly, the father agreed. They lifted Mama Fola's head and poured the bitter liquid between her lips. Jalen watched anxiously, hoping his knowledge would not fail him. Hours passed before the fever broke. When Mama Fola's eyes fluttered open, the weight on Jalen's chest lifted. But the elders were not pleased. That evening, Jalen was summoned to the village square, where the council of elders sat in a half-circle, their faces stern. "You defy our ways," Elder Kofi said. "You trust in leaves and roots, but we have always relied on the spirits. Do you think yourself wiser than the ancestors?" Jalen bowed his head respectfully. No, Elder Kofi. I only wish to help. The spirits guide us, but knowledge is also a gift. If we combine our wisdom with the ways of healing I have learned, we can save more lives. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, others scowled in disapproval. The village stood at a crossroads, torn between the past and the future. Elder Nana, the eldest among them, tapped her staff against the ground. We will test your methods, she declared. If they bring more harm than good, you will cease your work. Jalen accepted the challenge. In the coming weeks, he treated fevers, infected wounds, and ailments that had long plagued the village. Slowly, even the skeptical began to see the results. Yet, not all were convinced. One evening, as Jalen walked by the river, he encountered Chief Kola Adeyemi. The chief was a formidable man, respected and feared in equal measure. You are a bold young man, Chief Kola said. But boldness can lead to folly. You seek to change what has been for generations. Jalen met his gaze. I seek only to make things better, my chief. The chief studied him for a long moment before nodding. Then prove it. My own son has been ailing for weeks. The diviner's remedies have not worked. If you succeed where he has failed, you will have my blessing. If you fail. He left the words unspoken, but the warning was clear. Jalen's heart pounded. The chief's approval could change everything. That night, he prepared his medicines, his mind filled with both hope and fear. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew he could not turn back now. The fate of his village, and his place within it, hung in the balance. Jalen's journey had been filled with unexpected twists, yet nothing could have prepared him for the trials that awaited. After his encounter with the old mystic, who had whispered cryptic words of destiny into his ears, Jalen found himself standing at the threshold of a land unknown. The towering baobab trees swayed under the night's hush, their shadows dancing like spirits in the moonlight. A cold wind carried whispers, ones that seemed to call his name with a knowing tone. The first trial, the silence of the river. Jalen had been told to cross the river that cut through the land like a silver blade. It was no ordinary river. The villagers called it the mute waters because no sound came from it, not the rippling of the current, not the cry of the fish that leaped from its depths. The river's silence was an eerie thing, a place where even a man's breath seemed stolen from him. Stepping into the water, Jalen felt an unnatural stillness take hold. Each step forward was met with a weight, as if unseen hands were dragging him into the depths. Panic clawed at his heart, but he forced himself to remember the words of the old mystic. Listen with more than your ears. Closing his eyes, Jalen focused on the silence, not as an absence of sound, but as a message of its own. It was then he understood. The river did not demand struggle, it demanded surrender. With a deep breath, he let go of his fear, allowing the waters to take him. Rather than sinking, he found himself floating, his body carried effortlessly across to the other side. He had passed the first trial. The second trial, the shadowed path. Beyond the river lay a narrow path shrouded in mist. The path was said to lead to the heart of the enchanted forest, where men vanished without a trace. Jalen knew he had to tread carefully, for the spirits of the forest were known to trick and deceive. As he walked, he noticed that his own shadow seemed to move unnaturally. It did not follow the moon's light but twisted in ways that defied reason. Then it spoke. Turn back, Jalen. The road ahead leads only to despair. Jalen clenched his fists. I will not be swayed by illusions. The shadow grew taller, morphing into the form of his father. You were never meant for greatness, my son. You were meant to fail. Pain lanced through Jalen's heart, for the voice was not that of a trickster. It was exactly as he remembered it. But he had come too far to let doubt consume him. Drawing strength from the fire within, he stepped forward. The shadow howled in agony before vanishing into the mist. He had passed the second trial. The third trial, the keeper of the flame. At the end of the path stood an ancient shrine, within which burned an eternal flame. This fire was said to hold the wisdom of the ancestors, and only those worthy could claim its guidance. But guarding the shrine was a being unlike any Jalen had seen before. The keeper was a man of stone, his eyes glowing embers. His voice rumbled like thunder. "Why do you seek the flame?" Jalen bowed respectfully. "I seek knowledge. I seek to understand my fate." The keeper studied him for a long moment before drawing a sword of fire from his chest. "Then you must prove your worth in battle." Jalen had no weapon. He had only his wits and his will. But as the keeper lunged, he did not dodge. Instead, he held out his hands, showing no sign of fear. The sword stopped inches from his chest. "You do not fight," the keeper said, surprised. "There is no battle to be won against wisdom," Jalen replied. "The flame is not taken by force, but through understanding." The keeper smiled. "Then you are worthy." The flame leaped from the shrine and into Jalen's chest, filling him with warmth and visions of what was to come. He had passed the third trial. The journey continues. Jalen emerged from the trials changed. He had conquered fear, doubt, and violence, not through strength, but through wisdom. But his journey was far from over. The whispers of destiny grew louder, and the path ahead promised even greater challenges. The trials were but the beginning. Jalen had faced many trials in his journey, each one revealing more about himself and the world he sought to understand. He had conquered doubt, earned trust, and walked the fine line between wisdom and foolishness. But the road ahead was darker than ever, and the weight of his choices would determine the path of his people. A gathering storm. After the confrontation at the Elders' Council, Jalen became a figure of both admiration and suspicion. Some saw him as a rising leader, a man of great wisdom and strength, while others whispered that he was meddling in matters beyond his understanding. One evening, under the blood-red glow of the setting sun, a stranger arrived in the village. Clad in tattered robes and leaning on a staff twisted like the roots of an ancient tree, he introduced himself as Kofi the Seer. "The stars speak of a great change," Kofi murmured. "The land whispers your name, Jalen. But with change comes a trial. Will you face it?" Jalen, though wary, knew he could not turn away from destiny. "If the spirits demand it, I will not run." The seer nodded. "Then follow me. But know this, once you step forward, you may never return the same." The Cave of Shadows. Kofi led Jalen deep into the forest, where the trees grew so thick they swallowed the sunlight. Their path wound through ancient ruins, crumbling statues, and forgotten altars, remnants of a kingdom long lost. At last they stood before a cave mouth, dark as the void itself. "This is the Cave of Shadows," Kofi said. "Inside you will meet 3 figures. They will ask you questions. Answer wisely, or be lost to darkness." Jalen inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the journey pressing upon him. Then, with steady steps, he entered. Inside, the cave was alive. Shadows danced like restless spirits, whispering words that Jalen could not understand. Then, before him, 3 figures emerged. The first was a warrior, clad in iron and gold. His eyes burned like fire. "What is the measure of strength?" he demanded. Jalen thought of the battles he had seen, those fought with spears, and those fought with words. "Strength is not in the arm but in the heart. A warrior fights not to conquer, but to protect." The warrior's eyes softened, and he vanished into the shadows. The second figure was a merchant, wrapped in fine silks, with gold rings on his fingers. "What is the price of wisdom?" he asked. Jalen hesitated. "Wisdom is earned, not bought. It comes at the cost of pain, loss, and understanding." The merchant smiled and faded into the darkness. The final figure was a child, holding a single candle. "What is the greatest power of all?" she asked. Jalen knelt, meeting her gaze. "The greatest power is hope. Without it, even the strongest warrior and the wisest elder are lost." The child blew out her candle, and the cave was plunged into darkness. A new dawn. When Jalen awoke, he was outside the cave, with Kofi standing over him. "You have answered well," the seer said. "But the trial is not over. The village stands at the edge of war, and only you can guide them." Jalen stood, feeling a new weight upon his shoulders. He had gained wisdom, but now he had to use it. As they walked back, the first rays of dawn broke through the trees. The future was uncertain, but Jalen knew one thing: he was ready. Jalen had faced the cave of shadows and emerged with newfound wisdom, but his journey was far from over. While he had proven his understanding of strength, wisdom, and hope, the true test awaited him in the world of men. The village stood on the precipice of war, and only he could guide them toward a future of unity or destruction. A village divided. As Jalen and Kofi returned from the cave, they found the village in chaos. People gathered in angry clusters, shouting accusations and demanding action. At the heart of the turmoil stood Chief Kola Adeyemi, his once calm face now filled with worry. "What has happened?" Jalen asked, stepping forward. The chief turned to him with weary eyes. "The neighboring tribe, the Ambi, has sent a messenger. They demand our land, claiming it was stolen by our ancestors. If we refuse, they will come with warriors." A murmur ran through the crowd, voices rising in fear and anger. Some called for war, others for surrender. But Jalen saw the deeper problem. This was not just a dispute over land. It was a test of leadership, and the village was uncertain of who to follow. Kofi leaned close. "This is the moment your wisdom must shine. The people are lost. Give them a path." Jalen took a deep breath, stepping onto the raised platform in the village square. He raised his hands for silence. "We must not let fear drive us into foolishness," he declared. "Before we rush into battle, let us first seek understanding. Let us meet the Ambi as men, not as enemies." The crowd muttered, uncertain. "Would you have us bow before them?" a warrior challenged. Jalen shook his head. "I would have us know the truth before we act. If war comes, let it come for a just cause, not for pride." After a tense silence, Chief Kola nodded. "Very well. We will send a delegation to meet with the Ambi." The Council of Tribes. The next morning, Jalen, Chief Kola, and a small group of elders and warriors set out to the Ambi territory. They traveled under a white banner of peace, their spears sheathed. The Ambi village was larger than Jalen had expected. Their chief, Ikin, awaited them in a great hall, surrounded by his warriors. His face was lined with age but held the sharpness of a man who had seen much. "You have come in peace," Ikin said, his voice measured. "That is wise. But do not mistake our patience for weakness." Chief Kola spoke first, his words formal and cautious. "We come to understand why you claim our land." Ikin gestured to an elder beside him. The man, frail but with piercing eyes, stepped forward. "Long ago, our ancestors lived upon the land you now call home. They were driven away by war. Now we return to reclaim what is ours." Jalen saw the weight of history in the elder's face. This was not greed, this was a wound, passed through generations. "But the land is not empty," Jalen said carefully. "It is filled with people, families who have known no other home." Ikin studied him. "Then what would you propose, young one?" Jalen thought of the cave of shadows, of the answers he had given. Strength, wisdom, hope. The greatest power was not war, it was unity. "What if we share the land?" he asked. Murmurs erupted on both sides. The idea was unheard of. But Jalen pressed on. "There is enough for all. Instead of fighting, we can build together. We can trade, learn from one another, grow stronger as allies instead of enemies." Ikim considered this, then turned to his warriors. "And if your people refuse?" Jalen's voice was steady. "Then let me speak with them. Let me show them that peace is the stronger path." Ikin studied him for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled. "You are young, but you speak with the wisdom of elders," he said. "Very well. We will meet again in 3 days. If your people agree, we will find a way to build a new future together." The test of leadership. Jalen and the delegation returned to their village, but their task was far from over. Many still feared betrayal. Warriors demanded battle. Some elders hesitated, afraid to break tradition. Jalen stood before them once more. "We must ask ourselves, what do we fight for? Is it pride? Or is it the future of our children?" He spoke of the land, of the Ambia's history, of the chance to create something greater than war. Slowly, the voices of anger dimmed, replaced by understanding. Finally, Chief Kola spoke. "Let us meet the Ambi as equals." And so, the future of the village was set. A step toward the future. 3 days later, the two tribes met once more. There were still tensions, still unspoken fears, but the first step had been taken. They spoke of trade, of shared land, of a new bond. It would not be easy, but it was a beginning. And as Jalen watched the two chiefs shake hands, he knew his journey was not yet over. There was still much to learn, much to teach. But for now, he had given his people something greater than victory. He had given them hope. The village stood still under the golden hues of the setting sun. Birds sang their last songs before the night, and the wind carried whispers of the past. It was a time of reckoning. Jalen, now more than a young traveler, had seen the burdens of men, the cruelty of fate, and the unwavering strength of the human spirit. But the journey had not yet ended. Jalen had learned much, but the final lesson awaited him. The old seer, who had guided him with cryptic wisdom, had promised that the truth would reveal itself when the time was right. Now, standing before the sacred grove, he felt the weight of that promise. As he stepped into the ancient forest, the air changed. It was heavier, almost alive with energy. The trees were not merely trees, they were watchers, guardians of a history long forgotten. The wind whispered through the leaves, speaking in a language only the soul could understand. The villagers feared this place, believing that spirits roamed its depths, but Jalen had come seeking answers, not escape. After what felt like hours of walking, he reached a clearing where an enormous tree stood. Its roots stretched like fingers grasping the earth, and its branches reached toward the heavens as if seeking forgotten gods. In the heart of the tree, a carving glowed faintly, ancient symbols pulsing with life. This was the tree of remembrance, where the ancestors spoke to those willing to listen. Jalen knelt before the tree, placing his hands on its rough bark. A surge of warmth traveled through his fingers, and suddenly, he was no longer in the clearing. He stood in a realm where time had no meaning, surrounded by spirits. They were neither men nor ghosts, but something beyond human understanding. Their eyes bore the wisdom of centuries, and their presence was overwhelming yet comforting. "Jalen, seeker of truth," a voice echoed through the air. "You have come far, but do you understand why?" Jalen hesitated. He had traveled to learn, to discover, to grow, but the deeper purpose of his journey still eluded him. "I seek knowledge," he finally answered. "To understand the world, to right the wrongs I have seen." A figure stepped forward. It was the seer, but not as Jalen had known him. He was younger, his face unmarred by time. "And what have you learned?" the seer asked. Jalen closed his eyes, reflecting on his journey. He had seen the suffering of the poor, the greed of the powerful, the kindness of strangers, and the cruelty of fate. He had learned that the world was neither fair nor kind, but that within each man lay the power to change his destiny. "I have learned that wisdom is not found in riches or power," Jalen said, his voice steady. "It is found in understanding, in knowing that every soul carries a story, and that we are bound by the choices we make." The spirits murmured in approval, their voices blending like the rustling of leaves. The seer nodded. "You have learned well, Jalen. But one lesson remains." Before Jalen could ask, the world around him shifted. He stood in his village, but it was different. The people were there, yet they did not see him. He saw his mother, her face weary with worry, his father standing tall despite his years. He saw the children playing, the elders gathered in council. He saw himself, younger, eager, unaware of the journey ahead. Then he saw the future, a vision of what could be. The village, once struggling, was thriving. The people had not changed, but their hearts had. They no longer feared the unknown but embraced it. They no longer hoarded their wisdom but shared it. And at the heart of it all stood Jalen, not as a king, not as a ruler, but as a guide, a bridge between the past and the future. The vision faded, and Jalen found himself back in the clearing. The spirits had withdrawn, leaving only the seer. You have seen what could be, the seer said. The path ahead is yours to choose. Jalen bowed his head, the weight of understanding settling upon him. He had sought knowledge, but he had found purpose. The journey was not about seeking answers but about becoming the answer. With newfound resolve, he turned away from the sacred grove. His steps were steady, his heart light. The village awaited, and with it, the beginning of a new journey, not one of seeking, but of giving. As he emerged from the forest, the first stars blinked into existence, as if the ancestors themselves watched over him. The world was still flawed, still filled with hardship, but now he understood. Change did not come from waiting, it came from acting. Jalen smiled. His journey had ended, but his true story had just begun. The village gathered once more under the shade of the ancient baobab tree, its gnarled roots intertwined like the very fates of those who stood beneath its vast branches. Jalen stood tall, his gaze unwavering, his heart steady despite the weight of destiny upon his shoulders. He had faced betrayal, loss, and the cruelty of fate, but now, he stood on the precipice of change. The elders, their faces carved by time and wisdom, sat in a semicircle before him. At their center was Chief Kola Adeyemi, his staff adorned with the golden ornaments of his ancestors. The people watched in hushed anticipation. This was the moment that would define their future. The last test of wisdom. Chief Kola spoke, his voice carrying the authority of generations. Jalen, you have proven your strength and your courage, but the final test is one of wisdom. A true leader does not rule with might alone but with the wisdom to guide his people. He gestured to an old woman who stepped forward from the crowd. It was Auntie Funny, her eyes twinkling despite her years. In her hands she held a simple clay pot, its surface cracked with age. This pot, she said, lifting it for all to see, has been in my family for generations. It is said that whoever can mend its cracks will bring prosperity to the village. Jalen accepted the pot, running his fingers over its fragile surface. The villagers murmured among themselves. How could he possibly restore it? The pot was beyond repair. Jalen sat beneath the baobab tree, contemplating. He remembered his father's words, a leader does not see obstacles, only solutions. Instead of focusing on fixing what was broken, he realized something profound. He stood and addressed the village. This pot, though cracked, still holds its history. It has served generations, and its wisdom is etched into its lines. Just like our village, it does not need to be fixed but embraced for what it is. The true strength of a people is not in perfect things but in how we cherish our imperfections. A heavy silence followed his words, and then, slowly, applause spread through the crowd. Chief Kola nodded approvingly. You have seen beyond the surface, Jalen. You have passed the test of wisdom. The final confrontation. But just as peace seemed within reach, a loud voice broke through the celebration. You think mere words will make you a leader? David Adewale stepped forward, his face dark with anger. He had watched Jalen's rise with growing resentment. He had spent years building his influence, only to see it threatened by the son of a forgotten elder. He had waited for his moment, and now, he would not let it slip away. I challenge you, David declared, drawing a curved blade from his belt. If you are truly fit to lead, face me. The villagers gasped, but the elders did not intervene. This was a challenge of tradition. Jalen looked at David, then at the people. He knew violence would not unite them. I will not fight you, David, Jalen said, his voice firm. Our people have seen enough bloodshed. But if you truly wish to lead, prove it, not with steel, but with deeds. David sneered. Coward. Jalen shook his head. No. A coward fights for power. A leader fights for his people. The words struck deep. The villagers murmured, their trust in Jalen solidifying. David's bravado faltered. He had lost. Not by force, but by the undeniable truth of Jalen's wisdom. With a final glare, he dropped his blade and stormed away, his defeat witnessed by all. The coronation of a leader. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire and gold, the village erupted in joyous celebration. Chief Kola raised his staff. From this day forth, Jalen shall be known as the guide of our people." The villagers cheered, their voices uniting in song and dance. Jalen, standing at the heart of it all, felt the weight of leadership settle upon him, not as a burden, but as an honor. He looked at the people, his people, and knew that together, they would build a new future. And so, under the ancient baobab tree, beneath the watchful eyes of ancestors and the blessings of the earth, Jalen's journey was complete. A new dawn had come to the village, not through war or conquest, but through wisdom, unity, and the unwavering spirit of a leader who chose the path of peace.